It's not a house, it's a home. It's a castle. And it's not made out of bricks and mortar. It's made out of love and memories. These words from Daryl Kerrigan, the protagonist of the fantastically bogan movie The Castle, beautifully encapsulate that impossible value of a home. Somewhere where you live your life, make your memories, and share your love. You wouldn't think that Daryl and a politician would have much in common. But he and a former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Norman Kirk, do share at least one thing. Kirk, too, grew up from working class roots, and having built his own house, he knew the value of a home. As a politician, Kirk once mused that basically there are 4 things that matter to people. They have to have somewhere to live, they have to have food to eat, they have to have clothing to wear, and they have to have something to hope for. Not only is Norman Kirk setting out a vision of the most fundamental things we all need as people, but he's setting out a vision for the things government should ensure are available to everyone. In that quote also lies some subtle but powerful language. Kirk doesn't describe having a roof over your head or having shelter, a house. He describes having somewhere to live, a home. That dichotomy really struck a chord for me. Growing up, home was everything. It was where I would come after a long day and cry, where I would celebrate victory after a tennis match or laugh with my family round a fire. Home was everything. And it devastates me that in today's Australia, many young people don't have a home. The vision that Norman Kirk laid out is getting farther and farther out of reach. In 2002, the average house cost about 5 times what most people would earn in a year. 2 decades on, today, it costs 9 times the average annual income. That means that for those that can afford a home, they often have to take out a mortgage for up to 40 years. Imagine that. Daryl goes to the bank at 30, ready to buy his first home, and by the time he's paid it off, he's already retired. He's 70. For the rest of us, who can't even afford that 40-year mortgage, we become part of the ever-growing proportion of Australians who rent. Renting in Australia isn't quite like renting overseas. Overseas, renting can mean stable tenancies lasting decades. Stable tenancies meaning a house and a rental can be a home. But in Australia, renters have limited rights. They face the threat of no grounds evictions and constant skyrocketing rent hikes. Even worse, even the rental market is out of reach for some people. For many young Australians who are pushed out of the housing market and into the rental market, they become part of the problem because they're driving up demand and hence rents. That means that recently our national rental vacancy rate, in other words, the number of rental properties available to rent, hit 1%, a disgraceful 1%. I know of real estate agents who say when they get a list of applicants for a property, they can look at the first one, and if they look good on paper, they don't need to look at any of the others because that first person will be so desperate to put a roof over their head, all the others don't matter. I have had family who have had to leverage connections with real estate agents and landlords after months and months of trying to find a rental. And for those who don't have connections or didn't randomly by chance happen to be at the top of the list, their best bet is social housing. But with a waiting list and waiting times of over 10 years in many cases, and more than 170,000 Australians waiting for a social home, here too we are in crisis. As for those left over, they form part of the 120,000 Australians who are homeless every night. Young Australians are even worse. We are the ones that bear the brunt of this problem. We are the ones that face the burden of lower wages and higher prices. We are the ones that have to rent, perhaps for our entire lives. We are the ones that retire without the invaluable asset of a property, who constantly have to choose between paying the rent, paying the bills, paying for food, paying for medicine. We are the ones sitting on the social housing waitlist, and yes, we are the ones that into the future will be part of those 120,000 Australians who are homeless every night. It's clear that governments are failing in the duty that Norman Kirk set out for them, not something that would get into the pool room. So, in recent years, after years and years of young voices calling for change, finally governments and the media have started paying attention. After COVID, every week in the headlines, there's inevitably some story about our housing crisis, and so many of the statistics and stories that I've just recounted are what get dragged through every single week of our newspapers and TVs. But the media, governments, are so willing to talk about the problem and blame others and make it a political issue and say how their opponents aren't doing enough. But they're not willing, and never seem to be, to talk about solutions. So, how do we move from talking about the problem to talking about solutions? Especially on an issue that impacts young people so disproportionately, one of the most democratically disenfranchised groups in this country. That's where 10-year-old me comes in. From about the age of 10, I had this strange interest in politics. I would talk about the news of the day to anyone who would listen, and spent my time reading articles on my iPad. I truly was the precursor to the iPad kid. But that interest took me to an incredible program called Youth Parliament, where that interest became a passion. Not so much a passion for politics as a passion for helping others, a passion for creating change. Every day at Youth Parliament, we would walk from our accommodation into the city, through Hyde Park towards New South Wales Parliament. And as we walked, we would pass collections of rough sleepers and buskers, dressed in our suits and our polished shoes. It was a sobering reminder of just how privileged we were to have the opportunity to make change, to use our voices to pressure governments to improve the lives of young people, and yes, those rough sleepers and buskers who so desperately needed a hand. I think it's time that we experiment with our democracy and bring youth voices to the forefront of this conversation about our housing crisis. Australia has long been a country with a history of democratic experimentation. We were the country to first try out alternative voting and the secret ballot, and even more recently, we experimented with something called deliberative democracy in 2009 in an experiment called the Citizens' Parliament. The Citizens' Parliament consisted of 150 ordinary Australians, selected at random, one from every federal electorate. These ordinary Australians came together to discuss and debate how to make Australia's system of government better. The method, largely consensus-based. The group didn't bring ideology, but rather tried to find common ground and carve out solutions. In fact, one of the things they suggested was increasing youth voice in politics. We'd probably expect that it completely failed. Surely, like our real government, things would descend into name-calling and chaos and politicisation and ideology and all that other stuff that goes on. But no. Australians from all walks of life, ages 18 to 90, people with a PhD to tradespeople to first Australians, they came together and found solutions to make this country a better place. If they can do it, Australia too can do it. I think it's time we try something a bit like the Citizens' Parliament, but for young people, and exclusively focused on housing and our housing crisis. This group wouldn't be comprised of those already politically engaged or have tried out advocacy or are in the youth wing of a political party or were a youth parliament participant, but ordinary young Australians, the Daryl Kerrigans of the future. They would come together to bring their lived experience and bold ideas that I know that they have to come up with the solutions we need for our housing crisis. I recognise, though, that sometimes this isn't enough. And I think, unlike the Citizens' Parliament, This group should also be contributed to by experts like economists and other policymakers. This will only enhance the discussion, allowing these experts to bring in their own ideas and to bring in international best practice. But how do we stop this group from becoming a toothless tiger? Why should our politicians bother to listen at all? Well, it might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I think the solution is to bring politicians to the table. I think if we give politicians a stake in the process, let them contribute their own ideas and listen to ours, then they get to be part of building that consensus, that process of deliberation. But in return for being part of that consensus-building process, they commit to implementing the consensus. We stand at a crossroads. We can continue to wait in vain hope that our politicians will finally bring us the bold reforms we need in our housing crisis. The bold reforms that, if they were here, would have stopped 170,000 people waiting for social housing, would have stopped 120,000 people being homeless every night, would have stopped rents skyrocketing and house prices shooting through the roof. Or we can choose the path of real hope. We can choose to bring the voices of young people, governments, and experts together. I can see the headline now. A headline telling us about how young people, government, and experts have come up with a plan that will end homelessness in this country, that will make sure that there's enough social housing to go around, that will stop rents skyrocketing and housing prices going through the roof. But what can you do as an audience here today? Yes, you can believe that young people are a vital part of the change that we need. Yes, you can call on government and the media to embrace young voices, especially when it comes to our housing crisis. But at its most simplest level, you can help to change our culture, bit by bit by bit. You can embrace young voices and prioritize young voices in every aspect of your everyday life, not just in politics, not just on the housing crisis, but in all facets of your life. Oh, and one more thing. You can never, ever, as Darryl Kerrigan never, ever did, give up hope. I know I won't be giving up hope, because I know that if we bring the voices of young people to the front and centre of this conversation about our housing crisis, our best days lie ahead of us.